Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first EBMT Nurses Group podcast. My name's Emma Chalmers. I am a clinical educator from Edinburgh in the UK, and I'm joined today with my co-host, Michelle Kenyon, who is the current president of the EBMT Nurses Group. Hello, Michelle.
Hi there, Emma. Good to see you.
I'm really happy that you're with us today and that you are going to join me as co-host for the future for a little while at least. So that's going to be fantastic. It's always lovely to have an expert in the EBMT generally in hematology. Today we also are joined by the current president of EBMT, Anna Sureda, who I'm very excited to chat to. Good morning, Anna.
Hi, Emma. How are you doing? Nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So it is our very first podcast. We're very excited to have a podcast put together. We feel that it's a way for us to give education and exciting things to the nurses group. So the aim would be really for everybody to learn a little bit with us and to enjoy our conversations between ourselves, the host, and our guests. And if anybody has any ideas for what they might want to see in the future or hear in the future from us, please do get in touch. I will let you know the contact details at the end of the podcast. So as I've said today, we've got our guest, Anna, but we're also going to interview Michelle as the president of the EBMT Nurses Group. But in the future, we may have one or two guests on the podcast, really just depending on topics and the experts that are out in the environment. Michelle, have you anything you'd like to add into our introduction?
No, I think just a shout out to people that are tuning in, really, that if they have any suggestions for any future podcasts that they'd like us to focus on, then we really welcome those, and they can contact us through the EBMT website or DM through the EBMT Nurses Group Twitter. Again, like you, Emma, I'm very excited to be doing this and to be taking part. Particularly excited to hear from Anna today, and really hope that the podcast goes well, and look forward to recording many, many more with you.
I think it's going to be fantastic. And I'm going to plug it right now. Please share it with your colleagues, guys. If you're listening for the first time, please pass that on to your teams and your colleagues and let them know that this is another resource for them. So Anna, will we just jump straight into our questions with you and sort of get this conversation started?
Sure.
So first of all, it would be just lovely for anyone who maybe doesn't know you, if you could give us an introduction and maybe talk us through what your role is as president of EBMT.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Emma, for this really nice introduction. And of course, it's for me a great pleasure to participate in this activity for the nurses group, and of course in the first podcast. So a real pleasure for me. So my name is Anna Sureda. You have already introduced me. I'm a clinical hematologist, and I have been working in clinical hematology, I would say, for the last 30 or 35 years. I was trained in Madrid. I was born in Barcelona, and then I went back to Barcelona to work. So in a transplant way of doing things, I am a kind of mixed chimera between Barcelona and Madrid. So I started many, many years ago being involved with the EBMT life, and I have to say that EBMT has represented a significant portion of my professional life. So I joined the Lymphoma Working Party, and I was elected as a Lymphoma Working Party chair. If I remember correctly, that was in 2004, so quite a few years ago. So I was 6 years the chair of the Lymphoma Working Party, and then when my term finished, I decided to run for the secretary elections, and I was elected as secretary of the EBMT, and that was another 6 years from 2010 to 2016. And then at some point, I thought that I might be willing to run for the president position, and this is what I did 2 years ago. So the president position, it's a 4-year term, and then you have 1 year of being president-elect just to work with the with the president at the time, and of course to get used, let's say, to running the society, to all the meetings, and to the daily life. So I won the elections, and this is my first year of president of the EBMT. So I took over the past president, Professor Nicholas Kroger. It was in March last year, 2022, unfortunately virtually, because our annual meeting in Prague had to go hybrid in the very last moment. So it was a virtual transition, let's put it this way. So basically that's my history, let's say, in EBMT. And I have to say that I am very proud to represent the society in this specific position. I'm very happy to be able to work on a daily basis for EBMT. It's a very active, very nice, friendly, and really embracing society, trying to bring all the different healthcare professionals that are taking care of patients being treated with stem cell transplantation or other cellular therapy strategies that are a little bit newer than stem cell transplant. So I have to say that it's an honor for me.
Thank you so much. Well, congratulations on your appointment a couple of years ago. And I think you're doing a stand-up job so far. I've really enjoyed seeing how you're going so far. So really, the next question I wanted to ask you would be for anybody who maybe doesn't have too much of a knowledge of what EBMT actually is. What is the EBMT? Would you be able to give us a summary of the EBMT and what it does?
Sure. So EBMT stands for the European Society for Stem Cell Transplantation and Cellular Therapy. It was developed quite a few years ago, back in 1974, and it was basically a group of friends dedicated to stem cell transplantation to patients with hematological malignancies that were meeting, I have to say, in ski resorts. And they kind of divided their time between skiing and, of course, trying to improve the long-term outcome of patients that were candidates for a stem cell transplant. I have to say that I am quite happy that I didn't join this team because I don't ski, and I don't think that I will be able to learn how to ski properly without falling 1,000 different times. But anyway, that was the beginning of the EBMT. And of course, that was back in 1974. We are in 2023. The society has changed a lot. And I would say that probably the major changes have been seen in the last 15 years. EBMT has grown very much in terms of structure. So the EBMT team has more than 100 employees. And basically the mission and the vision of the society is to try to improve the long-term outcome of patients that are candidates for cellular therapy strategies. How are we doing that? We are using our registry. The EBMT registry, it's a unique tool, and I have to say that it's one of the big treasures of the society. It has more than 500,000 patients included in the registry that centers, all members of EBMT, because EBMT is being constituted by centers, are consecutively reporting. Let's say we work with the scientific output coming basically from the registry with retrospective analysis, prospective observational studies, and some prospective clinical trials. The other big part of the EBMT activity is dedicated to education and to continuous education programs. And I'm not only talking about physicians just because I am a physician, but I think that this concept basically goes into the different stakeholders and the different professionals that are dedicated to patients being treated with cellular therapy. So we have during the year many educational activities. Some of them, well, the biggest one, of course, is the annual meeting, but then we have small educational courses, mid-sized educational courses that have a quite well-organized calendar, I would say, and basically try to bring the latest new and the latest information to the different professionals. So physicians, nurses, pharmacists, lab technicians, of course, data managers and people working with the data in the registry. Psychologists, so I have to say that there are quite a lot of different professionals involved. So education is, I would say that kind of the second part of EBMT, or the second group of activities. And then of course, we also try to work as much as possible in accreditation. And we have to talk about JACE here, which has been another one of the successes of EBMT along the time. And there are some countries, UK is a good example of that, that to have allotransplant reimbursed, you have to be JACE accredited. So this is really an accreditation that it's being taken very seriously by different healthcare systems. And of course, we have in our center patients, families. We try to work as much as possible with patient advocacy. And I think that EBMT is doing quite a lot of effort, and maybe this is going to be better understood in the future regarding how we can reach the EU, how we can go to Brussels, and how we can eventually influence from the area that we are working. And I think that we are really experts in the field. Let's say some decisions that are being taken at the European level. So I think that I have made more or less a good summary of what we are doing in EBMT.
I think that's fantastic. And I would agree with you that skiing is not where we need to be having these conversations. And I would probably also fall a very long way down a mountain. I'm very glad
it was a very nice, Emma, it was a very nice combination, really. At some point, I have to say, let's say this is not scientific, but I think it's very nice when peripheral blood stem cells came into the field. The interest in, let's say, I would say in EBMT, but basically in the stem cell transplantation field increased enormously. And it was very difficult for the organizers to find a good venue or a big venue or a big enough venue in the ski research to basically allocate all the different professionals that were interested in coming to the annual meeting of the EBMT. So I think that after quite long discussions at that point, the decision was to abandon the ski research, which of course it was very nice, basically for those people that are skiing, and the program was taking into consideration, of course, let's say all these skiing parts of those days. And then the decision was to go back to attractive, nice, big enough cities around Europe to be able to host a meeting that was increasing in terms of numbers, and of course in terms of different professionals that were interested in the stem cell transplantation field.
And I think there are definitely some attractive cities. I'm very much looking forward to annual in Paris this year. So thank you so much for that summary. It was absolutely fantastic. And I've learned something I hadn't realized we started in ski resorts. What if a centre was thinking about maybe engaging with EBMT or joining EBMT, what would be the benefits for them to do so?
So as I have said before, EBMT, basically it's constituted by centers. So it's basically European centers, but we have quite a few centers that are not exactly in Europe, that are full members of EBMT. To be a full member of EBMT, let's say from a registry point of view, basically requires that the center has to report all consecutive transplants, at least in what we call the minimal essential data. Maybe this concept is going to be changed in the future because we are upgrading our registry platform to make it more modern and more friendly by the users. But anyway, this is one of the inclusion criteria, let's put it this way, for a center being a full member of EBMT. I think that there are many different benefits for a center and of course for all the professionals that belong to the center. And I have to say that when you go to the membership list, well, not nowadays, but when you see the members in a specific center belonging to EBMT, you have physicians, but of course you have nurses included in the list. You also have data managers. So there are quite a few different professionals that can be in the list of full EBMT member. So I think that which are the advantages? First of all, it's a unique opportunity to be part of really, I would say, cutting edge in terms of science, vibrant, open, EDI-based scientific community. And it's, let's say, the European umbrella for stem cell transplantation and for cellular therapy. And I think that this is a very good way to interact with other professionals and with the different professionals that at the end of the day contribute to the pathway of patients being treated with cellular therapy strategies. From a scientific point of view, and we can discuss a little bit more about the different scientific activities that can be of benefit for EBMT centers. From an educational point of view, I think it's an open door also to get in touch with members of other transplantation and cellular therapy societies. This is another aspect that EBMT is working very much. EBMT has been working in that, but this is another important aspect to be more developed even in the future. I think that we have to go global. We have to be harmonizing our concepts as much as possible, of course, with other transplant societies. We have a long-standing relationship with our American colleagues, with the CIBMTR, but of course there are many other transplant societies in Latin America, in the Far East, that are really very interesting. So I think that EBMT is an open door to be able to contribute to the education and the scientific project of people belonging to these societies. And of course, I think that it's a way to be able to have the patient in the center of our lives, working together with the different professionals. So I think that there are many different opportunities for members or for centers being members of the EBMT. We also have individual members that have, let's say, a kind of different profile, but basically EBMT is constituted by centers. And this is another differential characteristics that differentiates EBMT from other scientific societies, where the center, where the major aspect are not centers, but are individual. That's the contrary for EBMT.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I really love that the patient is obviously still going, is our priority in the whole.
Absolutely.
You know, it's such a big umbrella of huge amounts of opportunity, but at the very bottom of it is always that patient. They are the focus. Leading on to the, from what you've said, actually really, really nicely, I strongly believe that as nurses, we can contribute to scientific data very, very well. And I wondered if you could maybe summarize some of the working parties that nurses could perhaps join, or perhaps start asking about contributing to any data or anything really. If you could give us a summary of maybe some of the working parties. I know there's a lot, but that would be fabulous.
No, I think this is a very good question, because in fact, I have not entered into a specific detail regarding how the other side of the EBMT is constructed. So we have the what we call the executive committee, which is basically constituted by the treasurer, by the secretary, and the president of the society. And then we have, of course, the nurses group, and we have different working parties. We have disease-oriented working parties, for instance, the acute leukemia working party, lymphoma, chronic malignancies, and we have what we call transversal working parties that are basically looking eventually at infectious complications of transplant and cellular therapy recipients, at transplant complications, and so other than infectious, basically GVHD and other complications related to the process and quality of life. We have, of course, the pediatric working parties, which is, let's say, also a transversal working party because they are looking at different diseases, but of course in the children population. And my opinion, and this has been my opinion always, not because now I am the president of EBMT, I think that nurses are a key part of the professional team taking care of transplant patients. And in fact, patients always say the same. We see the doctor only a few minutes per day. We see our nurses all day long, 24/7. And I think that it's really, in fact, I would really like to have or to be able to favor more contribution of nurses in the different working parties. I think that independent on the topic of the working party, if it's a disease-oriented working party or a transversal-oriented working party or children or another working party, there are always nurses that can contribute and that can bring eventually independent, well, not independent, but nurses basically driven projects in specific areas, or that can eventually contribute with other professionals to bring a project and to have a project going into the very end. Of course, maybe there are some working parties where it's easier maybe for the nurses to participate. Now I'm talking from my own point of view. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Michelle would disagree a little bit with me, but for instance, I think that the transplant complications and quality of life working party, it's a working party where the participation of the nurses, it's for me clearer, at least from the beginning. Infectious disease working party, maybe there are some disease-oriented working parties where it's might be a little bit more difficult. I don't want to say that this is impossible, not at all. I think that we have to favor more and more the participation of nurses in all the different working parties. But maybe some of them, just because of the activity that nurses are doing with transplant patients, are easier for them to participate. But I would favor the nurses' participation in all the working parties. I think it's I mean, it's not a compliment because in fact it's a team. So everybody, so the different professionals bring into the team different points of view. And at the end, this kind of mixture, it's what gives, let's say, the real information regarding the complication, disease, quality of life of the patient. So it's this combined team. So I would encourage everybody, well, as many nurses as possible, to join all the working parties, because I think that all working parties would eventually benefit from their activities.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was literally about to say to Vogue, go and explore our working parties and see if there's something that you would like to join or be involved in. Anna, I've really enjoyed talking to you, but please stick around. We've got a couple more questions for you later on. We'll move over to Michelle, and I'm going to pick Michelle's brains a little and chat away with Michelle. And first of all, Michelle, I'm so happy to be doing this podcast with you. You're a bit of an inspiration to a lot of nurses out there, not to make you feel uncomfortable. I hope you don't, but I would love if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at the moment in terms of transplantation.
Thanks so much, Anna, and likewise, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to work with you on the podcasts, and as I said before, really looking forward to the future of these and seeing how they go forward. So myself, I have been a nurse working in haematology and stem cell transplant for more than 30 years now, which then, when I say it, makes me feel incredibly old. But inside, I still feel like I did, in some ways, you know, the memories of walking on my first haematology ward at the age of 20 are still very fresh in my mind, and the way that I felt then as a novice transplant nurse, a novice haematology nurse, right at the beginning of my career. I remember how bewildering that was, and the kind of expectations that I had about myself and my knowledge and how I might care for my patients in the best way that I possibly could. I was very fortunate with the experiences that I had in those days, that I had a lot of support around me from experienced nurses, but also from nurses who were peers of mine who were not so experienced. So, you know, we shared the joys and triumphs, but we also shared the tragedies and the experiences that we had with patients where things didn't go so well. And so that, I guess those early experiences for me really charged me with a desire to be a transplant nurse and to take part in the privilege of that care lifelong, really. And I guess I've made my bed now. I think I will probably be a transplant nurse for you know the remainder of my career, although I don't plan to go anywhere just yet. And so I guess I first started to notice EBMT, you know, around that time, and also had a desire to be able to, as all nurses do, innovate and make the experiences of our patients better. And I attended my very first EBMT meeting in 1996. In Aix-les-Bains, which I think was a sort of not such a ski resort, but I was presenting an abstract that I'd submitted, and actually just to be at EBMT at that point in my career. You know, I couldn't believe I had made it. I couldn't believe I had submitted an abstract. I couldn't believe that I was presenting an oral presentation. But I also remember the support that I received in order to get there. And again, you know, that's really important for nurses to be able to have an idea, to be able to develop that idea into a project and then submit that, describe that and submit it in abstract form. We often have in our meetings presentations around how to write abstracts, and we have resources on the EBMT Nurses Group website. And again, we're very happy for novice or experienced nurses who haven't presented abstracts previously to reach out to us for pointers, tips, and support in doing that, to enable people who put the effort in to submit abstracts to be as successful as they possibly can be. So I then moved down to, I trained in Liverpool, and all that happened while I was in Liverpool as a staff nurse. And then I moved down to London and started my career in London, developing in clinical nurse specialist roles in the transplant programme at King's College Hospital. I started out as a transplant coordinator, and then a number of years later as a post-transplant nurse, before my current role as a consultant nurse in stem cell transplant. I had a bit of a break from presenting in EBMT after my first presentation, and when my children were very young, but picked that back up again and started to submit abstracts again. My first involvement within the EBMT Society was probably around 2013-14, and I approached the then chair at an EBMT meeting where I was presenting, and really had this hunger, and I sort of thought I'd identified some time in my life that I'd be able to perhaps participate and do a little bit more within the EBMT Society. I wanted to be a part of what was happening, and so I asked, you know, how do I take part? How do I become part of this? And so I applied for a couple of roles. The first time I wasn't successful, but the second time I was. And I joined the scientific committee of the EBMT Nurses Group. And the scientific committee of the EBMT Nurses Group is essentially charged with organising our annual meeting programme, and more recently, the programme for the international training course, which happens in September each year, where EBMT nurses have a one-day programme running. And from scientific committee member, I was successful in being nominated and elected for the secretary of the nurses group. And then from then, again, I was successful in being nominated and elected for the role of president, which I have been doing now for 2 years. And gosh, it's been incredibly exciting. I have loved every moment of my time being part of EBMT, representing EBMT, working with colleagues through EBMT activities. I feel very blessed and fortunate to have had these opportunities and to share these opportunities with other nurses.
Thanks very much. You're very impassioned. It's fantastic. I think that's what we all see as other colleagues of yours. Sort of bringing it down to the nurses group, in fact, could you maybe explain to someone who doesn't know what really the nurses group is? What are our aims within the nurses group? What do we want to do, and what are we doing?
Thank you, Emma. So I'll try to keep this relatively succinct. There's a lot. We do a lot. So as EBMT Nurses Group, we are a subcommittee or a subgroup of the EBMT Society. So we share our mission, vision, and values with those of the EBMT Society. You know, within those values, advocacy and EDI feature really strongly, but also a passion for education and innovation within EBMT. Again, we have the patient right at the very heart of all that we do within the nurses group, echoing those values of the EBMT Society. And, you know, we're really focused on not only innovation and projects, but also research and education for nurses. And nurses working within, but also outside of the field of cellular and stem cell based therapies. And we try to maximize our reach so that we are able to work with and work through nurses globally. And we do that through the resources that we have available, through our education projects, some of which are hosted on the EBMT website, through our education programs that we deliver through meetings like the annual meeting, through the working party meetings, but also in our collaborations with other groups and societies globally in a similar way to the EBMT Society. But we have worked with the World Bone Marrow Transplant Group, with Saudi Society of Transplant. We have worked through the Indian Transplant Group as well. And we have also done some work to help nurses globally set up their own national groups for transplant nurses, so that there becomes another focus for those nurses nationally to have an identification, to have their own set of values and objectives, and to provide their own education and learning. And these projects have been really successful in transforming the way that nurses in countries like India and the South American group access education and training in transplantation and cell therapy. And those are pieces of work that we're incredibly proud of, and we take forward in the other groups that we work with. The structure of our group, we have the Nurses Group Board, and we have 4 subcommittees. So our scientific committee, which I mentioned briefly, we have a research committee, who, as it says on the tin, really, are responsible for research projects and research collaborations within the Nurses Group. outside of the nurses group and also with the working parties. We have our own paediatric committee, which works also within the Paediatric Diseases Working Party of the EBMT, but also has their own remit and projects. And we have our Global Education Committee, which again has a focus on improving access to education and training for nurses working in stem cell transplantation and cell therapies throughout the world. We also have individual nurse representatives working within or situated within the working parties. And we meet several times a year, but we bring those working party nurses together once a year with our group, and we share our experiences, learnings, successes, and ways we can share our experiences to improve our learning of those experiences. And we very recently appointed a lead for those working party nurses to enable that group to bring together and be the best and the strongest that they can be. We also have 10 national groups that are affiliated with EBMT. So these are groups of nurses working throughout France or throughout Spain, throughout Nordics, Turkey. And again, we bring the chairs of those national groups together once a year. So again, we can be inspired by the amazing work that those groups do within their countries, and again, learn from the things that have worked really, really well. So we're really about sharing experiences and sharing experience and knowledge to the benefit of our community, but also, of course, bearing in mind that also then benefits patient care.
It's so rich and fulfilling. It's so lovely to hear. We did talk a bit about learning within that, or you have outlined some learning for us. I really want to ask about continued professional development and how nurses can use the EBMT learning or the nurses groups for their CPD. What would you suggest?
Yeah, so we have some great online learning resources. We have a number of webinars that have been recorded that take people through basic concepts of stem cell transplant nursing to the more advanced experience. So there's something for everybody within those. We also have content that has been translated into Spanish as well. So there's great access there for Spanish and Latin American nurses who are from Spanish-speaking countries. We also have a VOD online module, which again has got sort of multi-components and is exceptional actually in its construction. And we also have an online version of our EBMT textbook for nurses. And that again, has some interactive components to it as well, and is a real rich resource for people who want to kind of be able to dip in and out of those offers. We also have the EBMT textbook for nurses that I just mentioned. It's free to download, has been a really valuable resource for nurses globally. We know that because it has downloaded since it was first published and launched in 2018, almost 500,000 copies. We are very, very excited that we are just on the brink of publishing the second edition of that, and it will be available and launched at the annual meeting in Paris. And shortly after, we will have our first fully translated version, which will be in French in honour of the meeting in Paris. And then shortly after that, we'll have a couple of other translated versions as well. So we're really excited about that because it's the first time that we have really looked at getting our materials translated fully to improve the access for nurses globally to these materials. We acknowledge and we recognise that while English is the language of the EBMT Society, it really is not the language of all nurses working in transplantation and cell therapy. And equality, diversity, and inclusion are massive pillars for the work of EBMT. And we want to be able to do what we can to encourage and include and be more inclusive for nurses working globally. So you can get CPD from all of those online resources, you know, looking at those independently, but also we have a number of education meeting offers that we run throughout the year, whether we join with working parties or whether we are hosting our own. So we have our own meeting at the annual meeting, we have our own track, we have 3 days of back-to-back nursing sessions, and we also have some parallel sessions running this time, which we haven't been able to do during our virtual years. So we're very excited about that. We have a very exciting programme to offer, and I'm really looking forward to that. And also being back in the room again, networking face-to-face, being in person, seeing everybody, colleagues, friends, and new friends, and people hopefully expressing an interest to work with us to achieve that mission and vision. We also have other meetings throughout the year. We have our annual education meeting, which is taking place in Madrid in October. There are save the date messages on the EBMT website now for that, and we're working on creating a really magnificent programme for that. We have a nurses programme at the International Training course, which happens early September. I think I have mentioned the main ones. Of course, we've just had the CAR-T meeting where we also have a nursing programme, which again was brilliant. It really, really was great. We're very well received from the feedback that we've had so far.
I have to say CAR-T 23 was phenomenal, and I really enjoyed myself and learned so much unbelievably overwhelmingly positive things. So it was absolutely fantastic. We can also, for anyone who's wondering, you can use some of these podcasts as CBD points or hours if you need to, because it is educational content. I'm just going to plug our podcast here, guys. So nurses are a rich resource of experience, Michelle. So how can maybe some of our nurses contribute to the learning that is available from the EBMT?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, don't be shy. Contact us, message us on our Twitter account at the EBMT Nurses. You know, message us via the website. You can drop an email or a message via that, and it will reach us through to the EBMT Nurses group. So first and foremost, I'm around, I'm accessible at the annual meeting. If you're in Paris, give me a nudge, come and speak to me. If you want to be part of what we're doing, come and share your ideas, and let's see how we can help you to work with us. You know, one of the things that I really want to invest in is to make sure that we're investing in our nurses of the future. We have recently launched, and will formally launch at the annual meeting, our next generation nurse movement. We have just appointed a next generation nurse who's a member of our scientific committee, and we will get that moving. What we really want to be able to do is with our education offers, reach nurses that are currently underserved by some of the education that's available for transplant nurses. And we want to be able to reach the nurses of the future. So we recognise that nurses at the beginning of their career have different education priorities from nurses towards the middle or the end, and we want to be able to provide a kind of whole career offer in terms of education. So yeah, come and speak to us. Reach out through the ways that I've mentioned. I am hopefully approachable and definitely accessible, and I look forward to being able to speak to people and hear their ideas.
You're definitely approachable. I can say that without pause. Actually, you spoke about the new generation of nurses, and my next question to you really is, what advice do you give new nurses or nurses that are new to transplantation and feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed or thinking that this is an insurmountable amount of training? What's your advice?
Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, I'm testimony. You know, I have been where you are. I've walked in your shoes. I think one of the greatest tips that that I would give is, you know, always ask questions. You know, you're never too old or too experienced to have a lack of knowledge. You know, we can't possibly have capacity to know everything. Everybody who is a transplant cell therapy nurse has gone from having little knowledge to having more knowledge. Be curious. Remember the skills that you do have. And don't be overwhelmed by the knowledge that you don't have. Knowledge can always be learned, but providing good, brilliant, excellent patient care, you know, you need to have those basic skills to be able to deliver and have aspirations to deliver that. Be curious about where you can find resources. Ask questions of your team. Post your ideas and thoughts through the various channels, so people can learn from the things that you don't know. Utilize podcasts like this. We're going to have a whole range of topics that we'll be sharing with you through the podcasts, so that will hopefully enable people to have some leverage and start to think about the things that they're really interested in. You know, stem cell transplant and cell therapy nursing, they're massive fields. You know, there is a lot to get to grips with, but there is also a lot that you can kind of channel into as your areas of interest.
And definitely download yourself a copy of the EBMT Nurses Handbook because it's free. Thanks so much, Michelle. That's been a really fantastic chat. I'd like to bring Anna back in, and I've got a couple of kind of almost quick fire type questions for you before we start wrapping up the podcast even. So first of all, Anna, what are your hopes for the transplant community in 2023?
Okay, so let me make my wish list. Of course, now I'm talking about the transplant community regarding EBMT. So from an EBMT point of view, and of course for the transplant community, I think that we should be even more proactive in trying to improve the long-term outcome of our patients, reducing basically the two major reasons why cellular therapy strategies fail in our patients, which are basically disease relapse after transplantation or after CAR T cells, and reduce the treatment-related mortality, which is another thing that we really don't like. And how we can do that? We can do that with more science and bringing more scientific output to our community. And I think that we have been discussing in length in this podcast how we can do that and how the team works together to be able to accomplish that. Education is another very important part of this, bringing additional hope to our patients. And Michelle has been talking a lot about the new generations of nurses. This is one thing that EBMT is really working very much. I think that 2 or 3 years ago, the trainee committee, which is basically including physicians, was developed within EBMT with a major objective to bring new blood, let's put it this way, into the cellular therapy field. And most importantly, to have a good continuation of what the senior ones, and probably I am including myself in this concept of being senior, have been able to give over the last few years. But we knew we need new people, different people, younger people, probably with new ideas or the continuation of ideas that they have learned from the senior ones to take the lead. And I think that this is very important in a society, to be able to have, in this sense, continuation. It's very nice to have outstanding people, but if these outstanding people don't have the capacity to bring new blood, this is really not very good. So I think that we have to dedicate quite a lot of efforts to education and to bring new people. I think that for us, and for the future, it could be very important to try to make all the accreditation process even stronger. We are just coming out from the unfortunate COVID-19 pandemics, and we haven't discussed about COVID-19. Probably it's not strictly necessary, but the reality is that it has had a big impact in our life, in the numbers of transplants and cellular therapy strategies that have been performed in our patients. And JC has also been struggling a lot. So there are really quite a lot of new interesting ideas to bring JC back into the field and to try to make it more friendly user by all the centers and by the different stakeholders. And one thing that we have, I think that we have dedicated quite a lot of time. Michelle has already mentioned that, and I also mentioned in my first intervention. It's about EDI. The EDI concept, which maybe it was started several years ago in EBMT, but I have to say that there were other scientific societies that had already had some experience working in this concept. Is something that has been in part improved in the last few years, but there are many other things that need to be done, and this is one thing that we need to work into the future to make EBMT an even more global and inclusive society in the broad sense of the word. So this is how I kind of see the future. Probably, I don't know if too optimistic, very challenging with many new things to be done, but I think that we will be able to accomplish, if not all of them, most of them.
I don't think any of us are shy about a challenge, Anna. I think we're all very keen. And new blood, no pun intended, but absolutely. And Michelle, same question to you. What are you aspiring to in 2023?
Gosh, I don't have a wish list like Anna, so I feel slightly on the back foot. But I guess one of the things that and Anna referred to COVID and what we've seen as changes that have happened since then. And I think that we've seen nurse education in general take a step backwards, and I find that frustrating, and I want that to change. We are doing everything that we can through EBMT Nurses Group to increase our offer and make our education resources more accessible for all. We are this year offering more scholarships, annual meeting grants, in order to be able to offer more education opportunities to nurses. But obviously, it doesn't mean that we can necessarily help everybody, which of course is unfortunate. So my wish, my dream, my aspiration, it probably extends beyond 2023, would really be to have an educational offer that is equal for everybody, so that nurses working in stem cell transplantation and cell therapy, regardless of where they live, have access to high quality education, a community where experience can be shared, and if they can possibly do that in person, then all the better. Again, I see that nurses are often being offered online education, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I also think that there needs to be equality in access to in-person education opportunities as well, because without the in-person, you don't get the same stimulation from your peers, and those networking opportunities, the opportunity to be in a meeting, meet Anna, meet you, meet myself, and all of our Nurses Group colleagues and the peers that are presenting. You can't replicate that online. And, you know, for me, when I sort of look back at, you know, how I started work within EBMT, then that was through the opportunities I had to be able to meet people in person. So that those would be my wishes.
I love it. I'm very impassioned about education myself, so I'm probably on exactly the same page as you guys. Okay, I've got one last question for you guys before we wrap things up. The question is, what are you most looking forward to in the next year? And I'm going to tweak it a little bit. Which of our events are you looking forward to most this year? And Michelle, you're first up this time round.
I mean, apart from the podcast series,
of course,
I think I would have to say the annual meeting. You know, because it's a festival of being in person. It's a festival education, sharing research, sharing experiences, getting together. You know, we're all massively hungry to be back in the room together, learning, sharing those experiences that are educational, but also those emotional experiences when we hear from nurses maybe who are presenting the same time for the first time, from patients who are sharing their experiences. So yeah, I have to say the annual meeting, the excitement and the buzz that we all get as we felt from CAR-T 23, the excitement and buzz that we get from being in the room together, having a coffee together, seeing each other again for a long time, from such a long time. You can't bottle that.
Brilliant. What about yourself, Anna?
I have to fully agree with Michelle. So I'm really looking for the annual meeting in Paris. I think that we had a very nice, let's put it this way, breakfast with the EU CAR-T. It's always a lot of question marks when we try to go away from COVID-19, and we really don't know exactly how the scientific community is going to accept going back face to face. Because it's true that we have been forced to go virtual for 2 years or 2 years and a half. And I have to admit that virtual things, they have some positive issues too. But of course, nothing, let's say, can be compared with a face-to-face meeting with all the direct interactions in different ways, not only scientific, but personal interactions, having a coffee together, a glass of wine, I don't know, discussing, walking around a little bit after the session. So this is something that we will never have, and we have never had with our virtual life. So I think that without any doubt, the annual meeting. Last year, we had, let's say, as we say in Spanish, the honey almost in our lips. And unfortunately, we had to cancel our face-to-face annual meeting in Prague, not because of COVID-19, but just because of the war. And I think that everybody was very much disappointed. On the other side, everybody understood the decision, and everybody made as much as possible to make the event as a really successful event. I think that it was really, really very successful. But nothing can be as successful as having a face-to-face meeting, of course, in a very nice city in Paris. So I think that everybody is looking looking forward to it. And I think that we already had a kind of, let's say, pre-meeting or a smaller meeting, which I think it was especially successful, and everybody was really impressed, positively impressed from every single point of view, which was the EU CAR-T meeting, which was the kind of proof of principle that going back face-to-face after COVID-19 in this kind, of course, it's not a very big meeting, nothing to compare with the annual meeting, but it's quite a big meeting with more than 1,000 people registered and around 800 people being on site, so quite big. I think it was a very clear demonstration and how much eager people were to meet face-to-face and to take advantage of the direct interaction.
Fantastic. I'm going to take the opportunity to remind people to go and have a look and see if they can still get tickets to come to the annual meeting in Paris this year, or to register for the virtual annual meeting this year. I have to echo your thoughts, though, that nothing compares to the face-to-face in terms of that experience and feeling the passion in the rooms, the many, many rooms. I am very sad to say that we now have to look at closing this podcast. Today's only, but of sort of getting to the end of the podcast. After such a fantastic discussion, I have really enjoyed talking to you, Anna and Michelle. I'm looking forward to a bit more with Michelle in the future podcasts. It's been fantastic to kind of have this overview of what EBMT actually is for people. We all have our own ideas about it, and now we know what our presidents are saying that this is, and that how we can use it in the future for our own development, as we said, of patient experience and improving patient outcomes. So I would like to thank Anna, first of all. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first Blood Matters podcast. It's been lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle, as well, for being my co-host and continuing to inspire all the nurses out there.
Thanks so much, Anna, and I'd like to extend my thanks to you also, Anna, for speaking to us on our first podcast this morning. Really insightful and always enjoyable.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Anna. So hopefully we've whet your appetite out there, guys, and you're really interested to see what our next podcast will bring. I would say watch this space. We will tell you when we're going to launch. We'll tell you what the next topics are going to be. And we'll continue that theme on. As I said at the very beginning of the podcast, if you have something you wish for us to talk about, please do let us know. Please do pass that information to us. You can do that, as Michelle said, through the EBMT website, through the Twitter handles at EBMT Nurses. You can do that if you happen to have mine or Michelle's contact details. I don't want to volunteer it too much, but if you happen to have them already, please do get in touch with us. And the final people that we have to absolutely thank are the people in the background who have enabled us to put together this podcast, who are doing the hard work of the editing and the resource hunting. And I can't even tell you, I know exactly what goes into the structure of a podcast, into setting one up. So very much like to thank the background team. And of course, anybody that has tuned in to listen to us today, we really appreciate your support. And I would massively encourage you to pass the information about this podcast onto your colleagues, onto anybody you think that might benefit from listening to us, because we really want this to be a success. And we can only do that through having listeners who want us to succeed. So thank you very much for listening to us. As I've said, this was the very first ever EBMT Nurses Group Blood Matters podcast, and hope you'll join us for next time. Thanks again.